In part 5 of this lecture, we are going to cover the basics of training evaluation. I want to begin by defining some similar but distinct concepts. The purpose of training evaluation is to assess the benefits or effectiveness of a training program. How well, if at all, did the program do what it sought to do? These benefits may be experienced at the individual level, like learning a new skill, and at the organizational level, like improving the quality of a product or service. Training evaluation specifically is the process of determining whether a program is effective. We need data to make this determination, and there are a variety of designs and methods we can use to do this. Training outcomes or criteria are the specific goals and standards for a program. What targets are we aiming to meet? Evaluation design then refers to the way in which we collect the information that will inform the evaluation process and determine whether the outcomes were fulfilled. The evaluation process provides several functions. First, it helps us identify the advantages and disadvantages of training programs by collecting data from a variety of sources. We can assess the different elements, the different features of a program to see if it does in fact have an impact on learning and transfer. Evaluation data also helps us understand the learner's perspective. Who learned the most and why? Who learned the least and why? Some of the more positive feedback we receive can be used to market the program to others through testimonials and evidence of actual change, of actual learning and transfer. The process should also involve a cost-benefit analysis, data which can then be used to calculate ROI, return on investment, and compare training programs. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain the Kirkpatrick and Phillips model of training evaluation. There are 5 levels in this model, and I will explain each one of them. Trainees' reactions to the program make up the first level. These reactions include their perceptions of, their opinions of, and their satisfaction with different elements of the program. We usually measure reactions with post-training surveys. Learners may rate their level of agreement with different statements about the training content, the training methods, the learning environment, and the trainer. We should also calculate a net promoter score for every learning event. This score represents the promotability of a program, the probability that trainees will recommend it to their colleagues. Although reactions are the most frequently measured outcomes, they have the weakest relationship with learning and transfer. They are most useful for assessing changes in attitudes and some knowledge. Learning outcomes make up the second level. To assess the extent to which trainees learned from the training, we can measure cognitive, affective, and skill-based outcomes. In this model, cognitive outcomes include knowledge, like facts, principles, procedures, processes. We are most interested in seeing whether trainees' knowledge increases, whether they have more knowledge after participating in a program. Skill-based outcomes are related to changes in behaviors, actions, and skills. This includes technical skills associated with a job or occupation, as well as motor skills that use physical movements. We can also assess learning outcomes by measuring the change in trainees' attitudes, motivation, and other internal qualities. For example, training might focus on increasing trainees' self-efficacy, developing more of a learning orientation, or enhancing people's appreciation of diversity. You are already familiar with the concept of transfer of training, which forms the third level of outcomes in the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model. Again, transfer is the application of learning to the job. Just as skill-based outcomes can help us assess learning outcomes, they can help us measure transfer outcomes. In this level, we're concerned with technical and motor skills, as well as social and conceptual skills. We can use work sample tests, observation, and self-assessments to measure transfer. Managers and coworkers can rate the degree to which trainees use their skills on the job and how well they use them. The fourth level is results, a measure of how the training program impacted the organization. Did the program produce the expected results? Did it increase sales, and by how much? Did it reduce errors, and by how much? Some other examples include increased productivity, increased quality, better customer service, decreased costs, and decreased turnover. Ideally, we gather this information from the organization using big data. Personnel files, historical records, and training technology can also provide valuable information. This is where Kirkpatrick's model stops, and the next level is where Phillips' contribution begins. Return on investment, or ROI, is a ratio that tells us how much of a return the company gets for every dollar it invests in a training program. If we invest $10,000, we hope to get that much and more back by increasing sales and minimizing errors, for example. Although this data is extremely valuable to strategic leadership, very few companies evaluate training at this level because it requires a great deal of time, know-how, and data. ROI calculations are based on the monetary values of training costs and benefits, both of which can be identified through a cost-benefit analysis. Benefits include the results we just learned about. Direct costs include things like the cost of paying trainers to teach and trainees to learn, of creating and printing training materials, and of training facilities and travel. Indirect costs include things like the salaries of support staff and the cost of a learning management system. Now we're going to explore 6 different training evaluation designs that we can use to evaluate training effectiveness. We will start with the most simple design and work our way up to the most complicated designs. The best designs have 3 things in common. The participants are randomly assigned 2 conditions, to the training condition or to the control condition. The best designs also collect data both before and after training. The post-test only design involves a single measurement from the training group at the end of training. It can tell us whether minimum qualifications have been met, but it can't tell us whether a change occurred, a change in knowledge, a change in skill, a change in some behavior. It is the simplest evaluation design and requires the least number of resources. However, it produces the least valuable information. This option might be useful when the budget is small or the training program is more developmental than strategic. The pre-test, post-test design involves 2 measurements from the training group, one before training and one after training. For each learner, we can compare their 2 sets of scores. We can use t-tests and other tests of significance to determine whether differences between pre-training scores and post-training scores are statistically significant and therefore indicative of a real change. However, without a control group, we can't be sure that the training program we are evaluating was the cause of this change. An increase in productivity, for example, might have been caused by a change in management, not the training program. This third design involves only a post-test, but includes a comparison group. Again, there are 2 measurements taken, one from the training group and one from a comparison group who did not participate in the training. It is very important that employees be randomly assigned to either the training group or the comparison group. After the measurements are taken, the comparison group can then participate in the training so that no one is left out. This design also tells us whether training is a probable cause of any significant changes we find. The use of a control group helps us isolate the effects of training versus the effects of some other event or factor that was also present at the time of training. The next design involves 4 measurements. Before the training intervention, both the training group and the comparison group are measured. Both groups are then measured once more after the training group completes the training. We start by looking for changes between the training group's pre-training scores and post-training scores to determine whether change occurred for the training group. Then we compare the 2 groups' pre-training scores. If they're similar, and they should be if we used random assignment, we can move forward with our analysis. If they are different, we can't determine whether training was the cause of any post changes we identify. It could be that the 2 groups were different to begin with. Finally, we compare the 2 groups' post-training scores. If the training group experienced significantly greater change than the comparison group, we might have evidence that the training was the cause of the change. If both groups experienced the same amount of change, another factor other than training likely caused it. The Solomon 4-group design is one of the gold standards in training evaluation. It combines 2 of the designs that we've already learned about, the post-test only with comparison group design and the pre-test post-test with comparison group design. This method requires 4 groups, 2 training groups, and 2 comparison groups, which means it requires a lot of resources. In exchange for the time and money it takes to implement this complex design, we can be more confident that the results are reliable and valid. This design can assess whether change occurred and whether training caused it. The final evaluation design that we are going to cover is called the time series design. Not only can it assess whether change occurred and whether training caused it, it can also assess the stability of training effects over time. For how long do the benefits of training last? This design collects multiple measurements, both before and after training. So we would have multiple pre-training scores and multiple post-training scores for each learner. We can improve the strengths of this design by adding a control group and by collecting measures during time periods when trainees do not receive training or boosters. Generally speaking, designs with more controls require more resources, but they are better.